Greetings everyone. Today we'll be discussing photosynthesis, respiration, and transpiration. These are three very important physiological processes that occur in plants. We'll begin with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a great reaction. You and I owe our existence to photosynthesis. Billions of years ago, when life was evolving on Earth, plant life came before animal life, and as plants photosynthesized, they enriched our atmosphere with oxygen. And you and I need that oxygen for something that we do called respiration. Plants provide us with two things. One of them is oxygen. The other thing plants give us is food. You've seen the movie The Lion King, right? Remember the circle of life? Well, this is Paul's version of the circle of life, and it all begins with the sun. The sun provides light for the plants, and the plants photosynthesize. They take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, they absorb water and minerals through their roots, and they're able to create sugar. They use that sugar to metabolize, to increase their biomass, to increase their size, and then of course they produce that valuable commodity called oxygen, which you and I need. The cow in this perfect little ecosystem is grazing on the plants, so the plants represent a source of food to the cow. The cow uses the oxygen that plants produce to respire, and in the process of respiring, that cow is giving off carbon dioxide, which in turn is used by the plants. So it's a perfect little diagram, a perfect little ecosystem. Where in plants does photosynthesis occur? Photosynthesis occurs in specialized cellular organelles called chloroplasts, and they are going to be found principally in the cells of leaves and sometimes in the stems of plants as well. So an example of this would be a cactus plant. So if you think of a cactus, the leaves of a cactus are spines, so spines are modified leaves, and then the stem of the cactus plant is green. So the stem tissue contains the chloroplasts for photosynthesis. This is the basic photosynthetic reaction, or the equation for photosynthesis. So plants need carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide they will obtain through their open leaf stomata. Carbon dioxide is a gas in our atmosphere. Water will be absorbed by the root system, transported through the xylem up into the veins of the leaf. The sun provides the sunlight, and in turn plants manufacture a particular sugar called glucose, which has the formula C6H12O6, and they manufacture oxygen. So two inputs, carbon dioxide and water, in the presence of sunlight, and the outputs are sugar and oxygen. And we should make it clear that the sunlight is illuminating those chloroplasts which contain chlorophyll, so that's an important part of the entire reaction as well. The reaction as you see it here is what we call a balanced reaction, and that simply means that 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water are converted into 1 glucose molecule and 6 molecules of oxygen. As it turns out, photosynthesis occurs in 2 steps or 2 stages. We have what are called the light reactions of photosynthesis, and we have the light independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. In order to understand the light reactions, we have to take a closer look at a chloroplast. Here's a magnified image of a chloroplast, and if you look closely at the diagram, you can see that chloroplasts contain two membranes. They have an outer membrane and an inner membrane. Inside the inner membrane is a liquid matrix called the stroma, and then inside the stroma are thylakoid discs, which look like little poker chips, and those thylakoid discs have their own membrane, and the thylakoid discs are stacked one on top of the other to form a granum. So the light reactions of photosynthesis occur in the thylakoid membrane, so the membrane of one of those little poker chips. The inputs into the light reaction are light and water, and the outputs or products of the light reaction are oxygen and two energy-rich compounds called ATP and NADPH. Now think of ATP and NADPH as energy-rich chemical compounds that plants can use to do work, to build things, to make things, using the energy of those two compounds. We had discussed earlier in class how leaves contain other pigments other than chlorophyll. For example, leaves contain carotenes and xanthophylls. In addition to those, leaves also contain two forms of chlorophyll. One form is called chlorophyll B, and the other form is chlorophyll A. So all these accessory pigments in chlorophyll B are going to absorb light energy from the sun and channel that light energy to chlorophyll A. Electrons in chlorophyll A are going to become excited, and they're going to jump to a higher energy state, a higher energy potential. Water that's needed for the light reactions would be absorbed by the roots, transported through xylem, eventually moving into the veins of the leaves. You are looking at the absorption spectra for chlorophyll. If you look at the diagram, you can see that where the peaks are, those are the wavelengths of light that chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are absorbing. So there's a lot of absorption in the blue range of the spectrum. There's a lot of absorption in the red range of the spectrum, but there's really nothing absorbed in the green range. So the bottom line is this: chlorophyll uses red and blue light, but reflects green light. That's why leaves are green. Just a second ago, we talked about the inputs into the light reaction, and we said those inputs were light and water, and we also said that the outputs of the light reaction were oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. Let's take a closer look at the light reaction outputs. Chlorophyll is absorbing light energy from the sun, and that light energy causes electrons in the chlorophyll molecule to move to a higher energy state. The electrons that are lost as they move to that higher energy state are quickly replenished by a fresh supply of electrons that come from the breakdown of a water molecule. When water is split, you end up with three different things. You end up with H+, which is hydrogen ions, or simply called protons. You end up with O2, which is oxygen gas. Oxygen will exit the open leaf stomata, and you end up with electrons. The bottom line is, as chlorophyll absorbs light energy from the sun, in particular the red and blue wavelengths of light, electrons in the chlorophyll molecule are excited. So those electrons, along with the protons that are created when water is split, are used to create those two energy-rich compounds, ATP and NADPH. And those energy-rich compounds will be moved over into the Calvin cycle. Now we're in the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. The Calvin cycle is occurring in the stroma of a thylakoid disc. And the inputs into the Calvin cycle include carbon dioxide, which is going to be absorbed through open-leaf stomata, a 5-carbon compound called ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate, ATP and NADPH, those come from the light reactions. The things that we make during the Calvin cycle is a compound called 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde, which can be converted into sugars, specifically glucose. And then we get ADP and NADP as products, and those are the depleted forms or the low energy forms of ATP and NADPH. Wow, light reactions, Calvin cycle, that's a lot to take in. So looking at this diagram, maybe we can summarize what we just talked about. Kind of in the center of the diagram, you're looking at the light reactions of photosynthesis. We said that the inputs into the light reactions are light and water, and what we get out of the light reactions are oxygen and two energy-rich compounds called ATP and NADPH. So let's focus in specifically how ATP and NADPH are created in the light reactions. We know that there are various pigments in leaves. Those pigments absorb light, in particular the red and blue wavelengths of light. They transfer their light energy to chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A becomes excited, specifically electrons in the chlorophyll A molecule become excited and jump to a higher energy state. As those electrons lose energy, work is being done. And what's being done is we're taking NADP and we're turning it into NADPH, the high energy form. At the same time this is going on, water is being split in the light reactions of photosynthesis. And when water is split, you get three things. You get hydrogen ions, also known as protons, you get electrons being created, and you get oxygen gas. The protons that are being created are used to take ADP and convert it into ATP, which is the high energy form of the molecule. Moving over to the Calvin cycle, which is to the right in the diagram, we're taking those two high energy compounds and we're using the energy contained in those compounds to fix carbon dioxide. So what do I mean when I say fix carbon dioxide? This is what we're talking about. We're taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It moves into the leaf through open leaf stomata. And then using the energy of those two compounds, we're joining the one carbon molecule, carbon dioxide, to a 5-carbon molecule called ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. In the diagram, that's abbreviated as RUBP. When that happens, we create a 6-carbon molecule. And that 6-carbon molecule is one of the products of the Calvin cycle, and it's called 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde. And it is abbreviated as 3PG in your diagram. As it turns out, 3PG can be converted into glucose which is the sugar that we said earlier was made during photosynthesis. To summarize up the Calvin cycle, we said that the inputs are carbon dioxide, which is a 1-carbon molecule. The other input is a 5-carbon molecule called ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. You have to have ATP and NADPH. Those come from the light reactions. And then as products of the Calvin cycle, you create basically sugars, glucose in specific, and then you end up with the depleted forms of ATP and NADPH. Those are ADP and NADP. I took the link to this video called Photosynthesis and I put it in the folder for Principles of Horticulture. And it's entitled Photosynthesis, Bozeman Science. I highly recommend that you watch the video. Hopefully watching the video will help put everything together. That was photosynthesis. Let's move on to respiration. And respiration is really not too tough because if you can remember the reaction for photosynthesis, then basically you'll remember the reaction for respiration, because respiration is essentially the reverse of photosynthesis. Respiration is a complementary reaction to photosynthesis, and respiration is occurring both in plants and in animals. So you and I are animals, we respire, and plants respire as well. The end product of respiration is ATP, which we're already familiar with because we saw that that was something that was created during the light reactions of photosynthesis. And we already talked about how ATP can be thought of as being a molecule that has stored chemical energy. ATP provides the energy that plants and animals use to make things that they need for survival. And when we say make things, we mean build things in a molecular sense. Photosynthesis occurs in chloroplasts. Respiration occurs in different cellular organelles called mitochondria. Mitochondria are organelles that you find in all the living cells of a plant, in leaf cells, in stem cells, in root cells. So mitochondria are different in the sense that they're located in all the living cells of a plant, whereas chloroplasts are primarily going to be located in leaves and perhaps in the stem cells of certain plants as well. This is the basic overall reaction for respiration, which we just said is the reverse or complementary reaction to photosynthesis. So in respiration, you're taking 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 oxygen molecules, and you are creating 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, and ATP. So again, this reaction is what we call the balanced reaction for respiration. This is what I like to call the big picture. This shows the relationship between photosynthesis and respiration in plants. If you look at the box labeled photosynthesis, the arrows that point into the box are the inputs. Arrows that come out of the box are outputs. Carbon dioxide, water, and light are all inputs into photosynthesis. Oxygen and sugar are outputs. On the respiration side, oxygen is an input, sugar is an input, carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP are all outputs. What's going on here? What is the big picture? Well, the big picture is this. Plants need to be able to make sugars because sugars are a substrate for the creation of more complex molecules such as starch, pectin, and cellulose, which is a major component of cell walls. Plants also have to be able to make lignins, fats, proteins, pigments, hormones, vitamins, tannins, and all manner of other substances. They use sugars as a substrate for the creation of those items, but they also need other minerals that they absorb through their root system along with water. In order to create these more complex organic compounds, we need the energy that's provided by ATP. Let's look at the relationship between photosynthesis, respiration, and light. Recapping some of the things we already know, photosynthesis requires light, so it's pretty much going to happen during the daylight hours when the sun is shining. Respiration, on the other hand, is occurring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in all the living cells in a plant. Photosynthesis occurs primarily in leaves because leaf cells contain chloroplasts, which are the organelles where photosynthesis occurs. Respiration is occurring in all the living cells of a plant. I like to think of photosynthesis as being a food-producing or sugar-producing reaction, and respiration being a food-consuming or sugar-consuming reaction. Again, remembering that respiration is essentially the reverse of photosynthesis. Got it so far? Let's move on. Sometimes I find it useful to imagine plants existing in one of three growth modes depending upon the amount of light the plant is receiving. A plant could be in a growth mode, a maintenance mode, or a survival mode. Let's use trees as an example to illustrate this. This diagram shows the relationship between light intensity and plant growth. Light intensity is increasing as you move from the right to the left in each of the three pairs of diagrams. The green bar represents photosynthesis, the red bar represents respiration. You'll notice one thing, I drew the red bars all the same height. And the reason I did that was to illustrate that respiration is occurring in the background in living plants. It occurs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's needed to make all those complex organic compounds that we spoke of earlier. Photosynthesis is very dependent upon light. The more light a plant receives, the more it can photosynthesize, and the more sugars it can create through photosynthesis. If we look at the pair of diagrams labeled growth, in this situation the plant is receiving a lot of light, so net photosynthesis is exceeding net respiration. In the middle, we see the maintenance phase of growth, where photosynthesis or net photosynthesis more or less equals net respiration, which literally means that the sugars that photosynthesis makes are all being consumed by respiration. And then over on the right-hand side, net photosynthesis is less than net respiration. This would be a low light situation, and the plant is in the survival mode. In the growth mode, a plant is receiving plenty of light. Photosynthesis is producing more sugars than the tree needs to support its metabolism. Those extra sugars are going to be converted into starches, and they'll be stored for future use. the tree will have plenty of energy, stored energy, to leaf out the following year. Life is good for the tree. Growth is a great mode to be in. In the maintenance mode, light is somewhat limiting to plant growth. Photosynthesis is producing just enough sugar to maintain the tree's metabolism. Sugar production is about equal to sugar consumption by respiration. Not many sugars are being stored as starches. The tree will not grow significantly the following year. In survival mode, light is severely limiting plant growth. One may wonder, how could a tree not get enough light? There are several reasons for this. One potential reason would be perhaps there's an insect or disease problem that damaged the leaves and caused the leaves to fall or prematurely defoliate. Well, if the tree doesn't have leaves, it can't photosynthesize. Or another way to think about this is maybe there's an insect that's chewing on the leaf and literally eating the leaf, only leaving the veins. Well, if the insect is eating the leaf, there's not going to be any cells for photosynthesis. Another possible explanation might be that maybe somebody planted a larger tree that's shading your smaller tree. Originally, your tree may have had plenty of light, but now your neighbor's larger tree is putting your tree in the shade and it's not getting enough light for survival. Or maybe you just planted a full sun tree species in a shady location. That would have been a bad choice on your part, taking a tree that requires full sun and planting it somewhere in your yard where it's not able to get full sun. So these are three possible explanations that could explain why a tree is not getting enough light. In survival mode, respiration is consuming all of the sugars that were made by photosynthesis. No starches are being stored at all. The tree is going to struggle to leaf out the following year, and unfortunately, a tree in survival mode is stressed out and will be predisposed to future insect and disease problems. All right, we've covered 2 out of the 3 important plant processes that occur. Let's take a look at the third thing, which is transpiration. Transpiration is that big pull, and we can define transpiration as being the loss of water vapor through open leaf stomata. Transpiration pulls or sucks water up through stems in much the same way that you pull liquid up through a straw. Let's go ahead and review water movement in plants. Much earlier in the class, we talked about root hairs, and we said that root hairs were the only part of a root system that actually absorbs water, and that you find root hairs at the very tips of actively growing roots. Root hairs are also modified epidermal cells. This is a diagram of a root hair sticking out into the soil. So root hairs draw water from the soil by a process called osmosis. When the root hairs or epidermal cells are turgid, they discharge water into the spaces between the cortex cells. If you remember your cross-sectional view of a dicot root, on the outside you have the epidermis, and some of those epidermal cells are modified into root hairs. And then past the epidermis you have a large layer of cells called the cortex. And the cortex are made primarily of parenchyma cells. And then as you move through the cortex, you come to the endodermis, with the Casparian strip, and then finally once you pass through that you get to the xylem, which is at the center of the root. So the epidermal cells, the root hairs, are absorbing water. They're becoming turgid. Turgid simply means that their vacuoles are filled with water, and that water squeezes out into the intracellular spaces between cortex cells. That represents the path of least resistance. If you look at the diagram, you see that the path of water through a root is indicated by the red line. This little osmotic push is called root pressure. Root pressure by itself can only move water a few feet up a stem. If you're a small herbaceous plant, perhaps only 1 to 2 feet tall, then root pressure alone could be responsible for moving water from the soil to the tips of your shoots. But if you're a Douglas fir tree, over 150 feet tall, root pressure by itself is not enough to move water all the way up to the top of your shoots. So we need more, and that's where transpiration comes in. This diagram kind of sums it all up. Transpiration starts with the sun, and the sun turns liquid water in a leaf into a vapor. Now remember that leaves are very thin, maybe as thin or thinner than a sheet of paper. So they warm up very quickly when exposed to full sun. And the liquid water in those cells of the leaf is going to turn into a water vapor. The water vapor is going to escape into the atmosphere through the open leaf stomata. You can see this in the diagram in the upper left-hand corner. Because of water's cohesive and adhesive properties, as water molecules exit the stomata, they are replaced by liquid water drawn into the mesophyll from the veins. Water molecules move in unbroken chains through the xylem and into the leaves. Basically what's happening is as the water vapor exits through those leaf stomata, that process that we call transpiration is pulling additional water molecules from the veins of the leaf into the cells where the water was lost. And this is occurring because water is a charged molecule. Remember, the hydrogen side of a water molecule has a positive charge, the oxygen side has a slightly negative charge, so water molecules want to stick to one another, and we said that is cohesion, the sticking of water molecules to one another. Water molecules also adhere. There are adhesive forces where molecules will cling to the inside of xylem vessel cells, or vessel elements. Transpiration, besides helping pull water up through stems into leaves, also has a cooling effect on leaves. And this is similar to the cooling effect you experience when water evaporates from your skin. If you jump into a swimming pool and get wet and then get out of the pool, you feel cool because water is evaporating from your skin, which has a cooling effect on you. The same thing happens in plants. As water evaporates from leaves, it has a cooling effect on the leaf. Really, transpiration has two main purposes. Its big job is to pull water up from the soil up to the leaves, that transpirational pull. But water also has a cooling effect on leaves as well. Let's look at some of the factors that affect the rate of transpiration in plants. Humidity. During dry, less humid days, the rate of transpiration increases. Temperature has a big effect on the rate of transpiration. If the temperature is high, if it's warm out, then the rate of transpiration also increases. On cool, cloudy days, the rate of transpiration will be relatively low. On warm, sunny days or hot, sunny days, the rate of transpiration will be higher. And finally, wind. Wind can also affect the rate of transpiration. On windy days, the rate of transpiration increases. So let's imagine that it's a hot, dry, windy day in Texas, and boy, we get a lot of days like that. When water loss from transpiration exceeds water absorption by the root system, then the leaf stomata have to close. Remember that leaf stomata can open and close as necessary to conserve water. So when the plant is losing more water to transpiration than its root system can absorb, the leaf stomata will close. Stomata may also close on windy days. With the stomata closed, however, that poses a problem because photosynthesis is going to grind to a halt as the leaves are no longer able to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere because now the stomata are closed. Some interesting facts about transpiration. 95% or more of the water absorbed by plants is lost to transpiration. Let's put this in context for a second by imagining a plant. And let's say that this plant, over its lifespan, absorbs 10,000 gallons of water. This means that 9,500 of those 10,000 gallons is going to be lost to transpiration, and only 500 gallons of the 10,000 absorbed will remain as water in plant tissues. Another way to think of it is imagine a 48-foot tall silver maple tree that can transpire as much as 58 gallons of water per hour. A forest of temperate broadleaf trees transpires 8,000 gallons of water per acre per day. A tomato plant will transpire 30 gallons over its growing season, a corn plant 55 gallons. So the point is, you can see that a lot of water is absorbed by plants and a lot of water is lost to transpiration. Most of the water absorbed by the roots is lost to transpiration. And you may wonder, well, why transpire at all? Well, the fact is, plants have to transpire to move water up to great heights. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for watching.